When you paint with acrylics, what is it that you do with the leftover wastewater? If you dump it down the drain, that could actually damage your pipes, and it's not good for the environment. One solution is to collect it in a bucket and let the water evaporate off. The problem with that is that it takes forever for the water to evaporate, especially if you live in a humid climate like I do. Fortunately, chemistry provides a much better solution. You can recycle your water in an afternoon. I bought the Golden Crash Paint Solids kit, and I collected a gallon of wastewater that's ready to be recycled. The kit includes a colander, a large bucket, and a 1-gallon bucket to collect your paint water in, plus the 2 different solutions. Here's my gallon of wastewater. I normally use like a paint container like this, and when I'm done painting, I just dump it in this bucket. I also use this Masterson rinse well to collect my wastewater. At the end of the video, I'll give you some tips so that you don't create so much wastewater in the first place. Both of these solutions are eye and skin irritants, so I recommend wearing gloves and safety glasses. If you do happen to get it on your skin, you just rinse it off with water. So I should point out that this only works with acrylic paints. It doesn't work on watercolor, gouache, or water mixed oils. I contacted Golden and they confirmed that it's only for acrylics. Crash Solution 1 is ammonium sulfate, which is acidic. The idea is that acrylics rely on a high pH in order to remain stable. So when you add something acidic to it, it breaks it down. Ammonium sulfate is used by gardeners to lower the pH of the soil. The cool thing is this is in liquid form, so you don't have to deal with any powders that get into the air. So the first step is to loosen this lid on the left. You have to press down a little bit. So you want to squeeze it until the liquid hits the 1 ounce mark. That looks about right to me. So carefully remove the lid and pour it into the wastewater. And then stir for 1 minute. The kit does come with a wood stirring stick, but I lost track of mine, so I'm using this spatula. All right, I think we're coming up on a minute. Okay, that's a minute. They say to let this sit for 15 minutes. It's been 15 minutes, and you do the same thing with solution 2. Solution 2 is sodium carbonate, and that will neutralize the acidity of this. That way, it'll be neutral and it won't damage your pipes when you flush the clear water down the drain. So I loosen the cap on the left side, and I'll squeeze it until it hits the 1 ounce mark. That looks pretty good. So now I'll pour it into the bucket. So I'll just stir this up. I let this sit for about an hour, and I can see that it's starting to clarify on the top. If I look at the side, and there's like a darker shadow area, and that's where all the components are starting to settle. The next step is to put a filter into the colander, and then the colander fits perfectly into the bucket. The instructions say to wet the filter, and I think that's so that it clings to the side of the colander and it doesn't flop in when you're pouring the water in here. One tip that I have is don't fill this up too high like I did. If you overfill it, it can cause 2 problems. For one, you need enough space to pour the chemistry in there, but I'm not going to be able to pour this in without spilling it everywhere. So I figure I'll just pour some of it off carefully using a jar. So I'll just do a couple of these until I can get it low enough where I can pour it. You can see that water at the top is pretty clear. So now I'll carefully pour it in here. I'll let that strain just a little bit so I can get more in there. Pour the rest in here. You can see all the pigment. You can see the water dripping down into the bottom of the bucket, and it's clear. They say to let this sit overnight, and when the pigment is totally dry, you can crumple it up and throw it out in the garbage. It's been over 24 hours and the paint is completely dry. So now I can throw away the filter and dump out the water. Here's what it looked like when it dried. One of these solutions crystallized, so that's what this white stuff is. At first I thought it was mold, but it's actually crystals. It's best to wait until the paint is dry before you throw out the filter, and that's because the pigments will be encased within the acrylic plastic, and that will ensure that the pigment won't end up in the water table. So you just carefully fold this up and throw it out in the garbage. If I remove the colander, you'll see that it's clear water without any paint in it, and you just dump that down the drain. You don't want to use this water for anything because it's been sitting around for months and tap water already has microbes in it, so it's best just to dump it down the drain. Now for some tips on how to create less wastewater in the first place. The first thing is when you do wash out a brush, you don't want to have a huge gob of paint on the bristles. If you get used to planning ahead, you can use up most of the paint on the bristles before you rinse out the brush. But even before you rinse off the brush, you can take a paper towel and wipe off the excess paint. That way you won't dirty up your water. You can use a rag like this one here, but what happens is it gets crusty and it doesn't really work as a rag anymore. So there's a lot less paint on here than when I first dipped it into the blue paint. This is the Masterson rinse well, and I like using this when I paint on smaller paintings like 8x10s or 9x12s. The reservoir here holds about a quarter cup of water. So when you rinse out a brush, you only get a small amount of water dirty. There are ridges on the bottom, so it does help to scrub out the paint out of the bristles. The bristles look clean, and I could start using a different color. You can keep reusing this water until it gets really filthy, and then you flush it. And then it automatically refills back up with clear water. The neat thing is you're only using a quarter cup of water at a time instead of dirtying up an entire container of water. So I find I don't go through water as quickly when I use something like this. Another quick tip is to have multiple brushes. You can have one for cool colors, one for warm colors, plus another one for white. It's not as if you need a brush for every color, but you can switch between warm and cool colors without having to rinse it out. That means you won't have to change the water out as frequently. That's all there is to recycling your paint water. You'll save your plumbing, and it also helps the environment. The leftover paint had a nice blue color to it, and some of that is actually Yin Min blue. I made a video about that. You can watch that next. Thanks for subscribing and liking this video.